Almost another week of football. Lucky or unlucky, week number 13, however it played out for you. Personally, I know that I got bit by a couple of the bye week blues. Did not end up winning some of those matchups. There were obviously injuries that happened, but we'll get into that later. Welcome to Britt's Blitz. I am your host, Britt Flinn, and we've got a ton of stuff to talk about today, as per usual. Before I get started, please post your questions in the chat. I would love to get to those. While you're there, make sure that you like and subscribe. That way, you can hear all of our great content, especially as we go into the fantasy football playoffs, which are only a week away, which is crazy for me to think that this season is already over and has flown by so fast. And of course, I want to introduce our producer, Brian Burns, for all of his great work. But as I mentioned, it was just a crazy week of football. There were fights all over the place. There were bizarre injuries. There were some pretty crazy upsets. It was just really interesting overall. And the playoff races are getting tight, especially with some of those upsets. And they helped make that race even tighter. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But for now, let's move into our Sunday night football recap. As I said earlier, make sure to get those questions in the chat as we go through this, and we will answer them after this segment. So, the Packers pulled off one of the bigger upsets of the season, especially against the Chiefs. I think maybe only the Broncos and the Cardinals Cowboys game was bigger because nobody expected the Packers to win this game. Um, a big narrative, however, is not the Packers winning. It's the fact that the officiating in this game was completely garbage. I think that it is time that we discuss the consistency of NFL officials because when you spend time after the game replaying what's going on, bringing in your rules expert, that is just really, really bad. It's to the point where every week we're talking about something going wrong with the officiating crew, and it's really just diluting the product. So, for example, there were a lot of questionable calls throughout the game, but especially in those very last moments and that very last comeback drive by the Chiefs. First off, it was that personal foul penalty that was called when Mahomes was clearly still in bounds, was running to get out of bounds and get that first down. The guys in the booth were just pretty apoplectic about it, especially their rules expert. Mahomes was clearly on the field of play when that hit was made. And then, after, as if it was in some effort to make up for that call, there was a missed pass interference against Marquez Valdez Scantling downfield. They then changed again and went back in the Chiefs' favor, ruling a forward progress and out of bounds for MVS to extend the drive. There was a missed 10-second runoff after that fumble was overturned. And then they stayed on air to discuss a possible missed PI on Travis Kelsey in the end zone, who was pushed from behind on that last second Hail Mary attempt. And I just have this to say to the NFL: we have got to have consistency. We cannot keep making these kinds of mistakes. And this is not the first time that we have experienced this. And we have the technology available to us to help us better track and get those calls correct. We have microchips in the players' uniforms. Put one in the ball to help on some of these spotting calls. That is something that Andrew Cooper has been calling for all season long. You just can't have this. And it's not just this game, as I mentioned. This one is just the most recent and most fresh on our minds, but it was just really, really bad officiating. So let's jump in and talk about the Packers because I think that we have to have a conversation about whether or not they are real and whether Jordan Love is real or not. Because this was their third straight win over very quality opponents. Jordan Love threw for 3 touchdowns again. Their defense looked good. Love spread the ball around effectively, and they did it without any real running game with Aaron Jones being out. With that win, they're now in the thick of the playoff hunt, getting up to 6-6 with a pretty winnable schedule coming up against the Giants, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Carolina Panthers, Minnesota Vikings, and Chicago Bears. So this is something that we definitely want to watch if they are getting hot at the right time. Romeo Dubs was the leading receiver, but unfortunately, he did not find the end zone. All of those points belong to Christian Watson, as he found the end zone twice. And I'm just going to come clean and say it. I had him in my sit-em column on Friday's show, and I just really whiffed on that one. So, upside down smiley face. You can't get everything right. I did not expect Christian Watson to come out against the Chiefs after what they did to shut down AJ Brown, but here we are. So with the Chiefs, I think that they are kind of in a free fall right now. They've lost two of their last four. Mahomes was plagued by some pretty uncharacteristic mistakes. He also only threw for 210 yards and threw an interception in that critical comeback drive down the field. Kelsey was once again the leading receiver, as we all expected, but nothing that really popped out, especially with where we drafted him. And he was also unable to find the end zone. Running back Isaiah Pacheco had a good game. That is until he was ejected for throwing a punch. There were just a lot of emotions running high. And now, with that loss, the Chiefs moved down to fourth in the AFC playoff standing. I think that they are really missing a bona fide number one wide receiver. And it's not even that, but you've got a promising young rookie in Rasheed Rice, and he's not even out there playing all the snaps. What is going on with the Kansas City offense? Very concerned going down the stretch as we get closer and closer to playoffs because we have seen historically how much that first round bye matters when you're in the playoffs. And right now, it's not really looking like the Chiefs are going to get that, unfortunately. Grumpy sports fan, thank you for being in the chat. That game last night made me extra grumpy. Yeah, same. I don't wanna say that I was as apoplectic as the announcers were in the booth, but there were so many calls that I was just like, "What is happening? How did you miss that?" Extra grumpy for sure. Robert, great to see you in the chat. And yeah, here we go. How about them Cowboys? We'll talk a little bit about that later, but I think that they definitely need to be in the conversation for one of the best teams in the NFC. Oh, that drop scared me, Burns. But I understand how some people feel towards Cowboys fans. I'm just gonna leave it at that. The the gameplay on both sides of the ball has looked very good. And yes, it's not just you. I think Kelsey did look a little slow, did look a little tired. Maybe I know you say it's the relationship spare tire. I'm more concerned about whether or not it is finally his age and all of those injuries catching up to him. Are we finally going to see that plateau where he falls off? We may have seen it with other guys like Derrick Henry starting this season. Once you hit a certain age, you just can't play the way that you used to. Your body just doesn't heal as fast. And trying to compete with some of these younger guys, you're just going to lose a step. Um, I don't want to mispronounce your name, but 86, I'll just say 86 in the chat. What's up? Yeah, Tyreek Hill would be a great fit with the Chiefs. Oh, wait. I had concerns about this last year. I thought that they would really miss having a wide receiver one. Nobody got the memo on how to beat Travis Kelsey, but this year they have. So it's going to be really interesting going into the playoffs. And then finally, Chad, before we get into some news and notes, do you think it's worth trying to go cheap on Spears as everyone jettisons their fab? I mean, he is definitely a handcuff option. I do not think it would be a bad idea to have him on your rosters. Derrick Henry, I think, is also supposed to enter free agency after this year. And with the Titans going 4-7 now, they are a very long shot to make the playoffs. So we may not see that workload from Derrick Henry that we've seen in December's past, which would be very good news for Spears. Let's see what we have in him. Let's see what we have going forward. And then we can make that decision on Derrick Henry as he's, kind of in the twilight of his career as far as running backs go. So let's talk about some top news from this week. Apparently, after yesterday's game, with Tim Boyle only throwing for 140 something yards, the Jets again want to make a change at quarterback. Surprise, surprise. Reportedly leaning towards Zach Wilson. I don't know what that means, but he is apparently reluctant to step back in. And you know what? I don't blame him. After being the scapegoat for this team, after being told that you are the starter going forward, that we have unwavering faith in you, blah, 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 blah. Maybe it's just Nathaniel Hackett. We saw what he did to Russell Wilson. Do you really think that he's going to help develop somebody who actually needs it when he caused a Super Bowl winner to regress? I have major concerns about that Jets organization, how it's been managed and dealt with. And guys, I hate to bring up he whom we do not speak of, but this guy is not coming back into the lineup if the Jets keep losing games and looking this crappy. Debo Samuel backed up his trash talk yesterday afternoon, scoring 3 touchdowns against the Philadelphia Eagles in convincing fashion. In case you missed it, there was some trash talk going on between them after the NFC Championship game last year, throughout the offseason, then up until last week. Debo said he doesn't regret anything that he said. And you've got to love when somebody comes with receipts and to back that up. Um, it's just not only great for me as a Cowboys fan to see the Eagles get knocked down a peg, but it just makes for a good narrative and good football. Another thing that makes for a good narrative is Buccaneers wide receiver Mike Evans. Yesterday, he had a monster game, which I did not think he was going to do with, JC Horn and Jeremy Chin back in the lineup, but he defied odds yet again. So he has hit 1,000 yards for the 10th time in his career yesterday. The next closest receiver to have 1,000-yard consecutive seasons only has six. So Mike Evans is definitely solidifying his place in the history books and potentially the Hall of Fame. Now, I mentioned earlier that it was a very weird day yesterday with people just getting in random fights, but I don't think that there's anyone that is more peculiar than Eagles security chief Dom DeSandro getting in a fight with 49ers Dre Greenlaw. Apparently, he could face some what they're saying is serious consequences and repercussions from that, not only him, but the Eagles organization as a whole. And just what are you thinking, man? I know that they do that segment, "Come on, man." This guy has to highlight that. What are you doing stepping in as a not even a coach, but as a security chief to jump in front of players? Oh, just what are you thinking? And that's about all I have to say about that. I'll pull my best Forrest Gump impression. Tyreek Hill is also well on his way to cracking the 2,000-yard record. He put up another excellent game yesterday with 152 yards, putting him at 1481 on the year. So, can he do it in 16 games? Is the question. I do not want any record to have an asterisk next to it saying, well, Calvin Johnson did this in 16. He had to take 17. No, if you're going to be that dominant, especially towards the end of your career, let's get this done in 16 games and just put all the rumors to rest and solidify your spot in NFL history. Talking about people and their rise to fame, Brock Purdy. After that performance against the Eagles yesterday, he is now the odds-on favorite to win MVP after last night's performance, followed by Jalen Hurts and Dak Prescott in a tie. All the talk at the beginning of the season was around the strength of the AFC early in the year. And while I do think that that still is a valid point, they've kind of all cannibalized each other. It's in the NFC, it's the Eagles, it's the 49ers, and it's the Cowboys who are the clear contenders. But I don't know how much you can credit Purdy to where he's in the MVP conversation. This is no way a knock on him or his talent, but when you have that defense, when you have Christian McCaffrey, when you factor in everything, has Purdy's performance been MVP caliber? Now, I will say that he is the first quarterback with 4 games of 3 or more passing touchdowns, no interceptions, and averaging 10 yards per attempt. So let's just take that for what it's worth. Going back to the chat before we jump into some injury news and notes, which although it wasn't crazy, the ones that did happen were brutal. I see one in the chat. George, great to see you in here. Lost Tank Dell. My other wide receivers are Cup, Waddle, Olave, Deontay, and JSN. Who should I pick up? Michael Wilson, OBJ, Hyatt, or Palmer? I'm not sure about the health of Michael Wilson. If he plays, then he's as good of a pick as any, especially since Marquise Brown went out. But I think I'm really leaning OBJ here with Mark Andrews continuing to be out. But best of luck to you. I also lost Tank Dell, and I, for the life of me, cannot understand why he was in blocking on that scrum play. This guy is 5'8", like 160 something pounds. You're telling me you don't have a better option to go in there and block. And that's what happened when he got caught up on the pile. So just do not like that at all. Grumpy sports fan, what do I think of Big Dom Eagle security? Yeah, I think that's stupid. There was no reason for him to get involved. It just causes unnecessary stress and scrutiny. I know that all the Eagles fans loved it. They were giving him a standing ovation on the way out because I guess that's just how Philly is, but it was a very dumb decision. Chad says he ended Blake Bortles, nearly ended Russ. He just sucks. Yeah, I think we need to start looking more at the offensive coordinator than we do the actual quarterback. And Howard Bender, as a Jets fan and amazing analyst, has been in on this opinion all year long. And I completely agree with him. Finally, last comment before we get into the injuries from this week. AJ McCarron elevated for tonight's game. Could a desperation quarterback change be on the horizon for the Bengals? I'm not ruling anything out at this point in the season. If Browning comes out there flat and can't move the ball, I think that they might try anything possible because they are just on the bubble of playoff contention. And if they lose tonight, it's going to be very difficult for them to make it in. All right, so getting to the injuries, we did have a question earlier about Derrick Henry, who, of course, went out of the game after being evaluated for a concussion yesterday. But earlier this morning, head coach Mike Vrabel said that Henry is not, in fact, in concussion protocol and will be good to go in week 14. While that's good news, I still don't necessarily trust their usage of him. They may look towards Spears and just see what they have in him, especially as Henry again gets older and nears the start of free agency after this year. As we mentioned, Tank Dell broke his fibula, so he will miss the remainder of the season. I hate this. He was one of my rookie flag plants. He was having an incredibly great season. You just hate to see an injury like that occur, especially on a play that was 100% preventable. You did not have to have him in there. Yeah, womp womp indeed, Burns. I also said they were utilizing Andrew Beck to as an actual pass catcher early on in the game. Why was their fullback not in there blocking on that play? If he was, I missed it, but still, you had to have had somebody bigger who could have made that play. And now you lost a receiver. So let's just scratch that one from the old playbook. Another guy who got an ankle injury, albeit not as severe, is Steelers quarterback Kenny Pickett. He is undergoing ankle surgery and is expected to miss the next 2 to 3 weeks. They are saying if he or that he is not a candidate for injured reserve, so that is some good news. Although, what are we really expecting? Like from the Steelers? What we're not. That over under for that game started out, I think, at 31.5 for Thursday night's matchup against the Patriots. It's already fallen to 30.5. There's just not going to be a lot of offense here, guys. Another quarterback who got injured, Derek Carr, is back in concussion protocol for the second time in just a few weeks. It's also a shoulder injury for him, which he's had early on in the season. Um, Definitely having pretty much what amounts to back concussions and back to back shoulder injuries is just not a good sign. I think that they're going to see how Carr progresses throughout the week, and they are opening the door for Jameis Winston to get the start if he is not ready to go. Another backup who is notable is Giants quarterback Tyrod Taylor, who is being designated to return from injured reserve. I don't know if they're going to roll with Taylor or if they're going to continue rolling out Tommy DeVito. But if you have been one of those fantasy teams who has been forced to pick up DeVito for your Superflex leagues, keep an eye out on that and make sure that he does not get benched for Taylor. A couple more here. Ramondre Stevenson suffered an ankle injury early on in the game. The x-rays were negative, thankfully, but he is expected to miss some time. Now, how much time, we don't really know. Um, if you picked up Zeke, who I mentioned in the waiver wire article last week as a handcuff to Stevenson, then you're feeling pretty good about it, but time will tell. A couple more running backs who got injured. Brian Robinson left with a hamstring injury. Cardinals running back Amari DiMercato left with a neck/head injury and did not return. Marquise Brown from the Cardinals as well, who had been on the injury report all week, left in the third quarter after re-aggravating his heel. Not good news for a receiving core that's already pretty depleted, but at least they do have the bye going into week 14. Amari Cooper suffered a head injury, unfortunately. Rams wide receiver Puka Nakua suffered a rib injury and left after I believe it was initially thought to be cramping, but then he came back in and then he left again. So we'll monitor that. And fellow Ram tight end Tyler Higbee left with an arm injury. So that's our injury rundown. I'm not going to do the DeVito hand, but you can just imagine it in emoji form. Um, says that I've heard that it's season ending in regards to Ramondre Stevenson. Definitely not great. We are going to be eagerly awaiting additional tests for that. And then is Sam Howell a boomer bust guy? Streamed him. Yeah, almost had a heart attack until those two rushing touchdowns. I think that he is more boom than bust. He's not a great real life quarterback, but the volume at which he has been throwing gives him fantasy relevance. When you're throwing 40 to 45 times a game, just the law of averages kicks in and you're bound to get something. So I don't think that he's necessarily got a big bust risk, although he does have a more difficult schedule going into the playoffs. So I'd be interested in seeing who else you have at quarterback. And then finally, Chad says, I'm concerned by the lack of Christian Watson update. Yeah, that was pretty concerning. Looked like it was almost a non contact situation. He's already had hamstring issues in the past. If that is indeed his hamstring, not good news for a really exciting and emerging Green Bay offense. Let's talk about some of these week 12 fantasy leaders, and then we'll take a quick break here. Geno Smith led all of the quarterbacks with 31 points, which is insane considering that he went up against Dallas's defense, that they were supposed to win that game handedly. But he is atop the leaderboard, followed by Brock Purdy with 29 and a half points and Dak Prescott at 28.3. For the running backs, we've got Alvin Kamara with 28.9 PPR points. Gotta love those dump offs that we get. But if Jameis Winston does start over Carr, I would temper your expectations because Winston's going to look much more downfield than he is for those Kamara drop offs. In second, we had Devon Achan coming back from injury, 25.3 PPR points. And to round it all out, Derrick Henry with 25 points. Even going out, he had those two touchdowns early. I think his ceiling would have just been massive if he would have been able to stay in the game. At wide receiver, we've got DK Metcalf. No surprise there. 3 touchdowns, just eating Deron Bland up in coverage, followed by Debo Samuel at 35.8, and then Nico Collins emerging for the second week in a row as the Texans' top receiver at 34.1. I also do have to give an honorable mention to Puka Nakua, who broke the Rams record for the most receiving yards in a season. So congrats to you for the most rookie receiving yards in a season. So congrats to you. That's super exciting. Waiver wire darling as well. Love to see it. For the tight ends, it is Sam Laporta coming in with a massive 29 PPR fantasy points, followed by Trey McBride at 22.9 and Jake Ferguson, all guys that we need to be looking at down the stretch. The only one who may still be available on waivers is potentially Ferguson. So, spoiler alert to tomorrow's waiver wire article that you can find at fantasyalarm.com. He may just be mentioned in there. For defense, it was the Chargers, surprisingly, at 17, the Colts at 17, and then the Falcons at 16. None of these top defenses made their appearance. It is that time in the year where it kind of is matchup based. So yeah, it came in the least expected of places. Let me just tell you. For some duds, we've got Justin Herbert, the QB 21 with only 8 fantasy points. Although it should be mentioned that his receivers had 5 drops throughout that game, and you can't really do much as a quarterback when your receivers can't catch the ball. That's just how it is. For running backs, piggybacking off of this poor Chargers performance, Austin Eckler, RB31 with only 4.7 fantasy points, and then Stevenson obviously going out early with 2.9. For the wide receivers, Adam Thielen, wide receiver 35 with 5.5 fantasy points. We thought that this cleaning house of the Panthers coaching staff was going to change some things for Thielen, but unfortunately it did not. Josh Downs also put in a very disappointing performance. Wide receiver 49 with 4.4 fantasy points. Our most disappointing tight end, in my opinion, was Logan Thomas of the Washington Commanders. Tight end 35 with just 2 fantasy points, and that didn't even come in real gameplay. It was a 2-point conversion situation. Just a really bleak day for him, especially in that bipocalypse if you were plugging him in. For the defense, for me at least, it was the Steelers defense, 17 with only 2 fantasy points. Going up against the Cardinals, you really, really thought that they were going to have a good day, but they could not get it done. So that wraps up our Week 12 recap. Coming up next, we will jump into some stuff for tonight, but I want to know if you're watching the game tonight, if you have downloaded the BetterCast app, because we are always on there We are talking about the game. We are answering live questions, predicting what will happen. You can answer some pregame questions with some player props. And if you win, you get tickets that you can redeem for real NFL merchandise. So to download the Bettercast app, scan that QR code on the screen or go to the Apple app and Google Play stores and jump in with us. Hang out with us. It's always a great time in there and you can win free prizes. So it's a win-win situation. Make sure to download that and join us in the Bettercast app tonight. We've also still got a special deal going on at fantasyalarm.com for our All Pro subscription. Go to fantasyalarm.com/win today. Use promo code Let's Go, and you get 50% off your first monthly payment. With the All Pro package, you get everything. You get all of our sports, all of our articles, all of our tools, access to our experts in Discord. Everything that our site offers comes as part of that All Pro package. So make sure to get signed up with that today and go to fantasyalarm.com/win, or again, scan that handy QR code on your screen. All right, so we're going to take a quick break here, but if you're looking for some DFS plays for tonight's matchup between the Bengals and Jaguars, don't go anywhere. We will be right back in a few minutes with our DFS heavy hitters next.
What can we expect for you out there on the track tonight?
Listen, I have a wife, 2 kids. I have, full-time jobs. I'm never nervous. I don't even know what that word means. Can you explain what nervous means? No. I'm ready to have fun. I've never done anything like this before. I got asked to be a part of this. This is fascinating. Like, it's so cool to just look around and see what goes on here. So I'm just excited to get out on the horse. And you want trash talk? Is that what you're asking me for? No trash talk. I hope everyone does well.
All right. Everyone's going to do well, but it has to be a winner. So give me your trifecta. Who's going to come in first, second, and third? Your heat.
I will go Maria 1, me 2, Willie 3, Moose goes 4th.
Well, it's very simple. I won this event last year. I won my heat, and so the defending champ has to be the favorite. Now, that makes me a little nervous just because I feel like it's hard to repeat. There's a little pressure when you're the favorite, but that being said, I'm still optimistic.
So your heat, it's you,
yes,
Moose and Keith from Better Sports Network, and Willie Colon.
I think Keith might be my stiffest competition, and I asked for this because I actually recruited Keith, if you didn't know. So Keith, if you win, you're welcome.
Malusis is very good. I mean, he knows what he's doing, but I'm going to go with Maria.
Keith is waving to the crowd. He must pay attention because they're off. It's Mark Malusis going for the lead. Maria Marino on the outside, and now Keith Irizarry on the outside with speed. And they're 3 wide into the first turn. Woo! Mark Malusis is locked in for his life. 138 and 2. They're into the stretch. Sportscasters Derby 2. And still in front, Keith Irizarry. And now Mark Malusis is trying to squeeze on through. Come on! Come on! Let's go! Take it! Yeah! Keith Irizarry. Keith, you did it all the way, wire to wire. Over Mark Malusis.
That was so cool. The champ is here. Keith, what was it like being out there? Adrenaline rush. You were doing the Instagram live, so there was no panic. You looked cool, calm, collected the whole time, and you won it.
I felt really comfortable. I did. Like, I know you were joking with me before. Are you nervous? Are you whatever? What are you? David, the driver, was awesome. He's like, we're gonna win this. I said, all right, let's win this. And he said, let's go. Yeah, I just felt really comfortable. I did. It was fun. We're in the lead. I got Maria Marino on the right side of me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, she's gonna beat us, right? And then out of nowhere, you see Moose coming up this way, and we feel him breathing down our neck. And I'm like,
Moose on the loose, watch out.
Moose was definitely on the loose, and we just got Moose by a neck, a nose, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, but again, all of this for a great cause, and it was absolutely awesome to do this. It was cool.
All right, Keith, congratulations, and no matter what, you can always hold this over Moose's head.
Yeah!
Break. I see a couple of y'all in the chat saying, Geek Mill, great to see you in here. App downloaded. I can't wait to see you in the chat tonight. That's going to be so much fun. And then Chad has a comment going back to the Panthers saying that it did change things, but part of the changing was phasing Thielen out to get a real look at Mingo. Yeah, I do not doubt that for 1 second. Unfortunately, it hurts on all my leagues where I have Thielen and where he was doing so well and was basically a free square early on in the season. It really hurts to lose that safe floor going into the playoffs. But I digress. Week 13 is almost over, but of course, we do have one final game tonight against the Cincinnati Bengals going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars are currently the third seed overall in the AFC, but they're looking to move up, especially after the Chiefs lost. They can smell blood in the water, and they are right in the thick of it. So a win here tonight would be really pivotal in trying to secure that coveted week one or first round bye in the playoffs. The Bengals, on the other hand, are kind of lost. They are barely above water. They don't really have any real chance to make the playoffs, as right now they're 11th in playoff seeding. So I think at this point, it's just a matter of pride. As somebody mentioned in the comments earlier, AJ McCarron was activated. Whether or not that's because Browning is on a short leash or because it's just an emergency, we don't really know. But at this point, I think that everything's on the table. They have to win in that competitive division. But let's talk about some of the DFS heavy hitters for tonight, and make sure that you go read the playbook over at fantasyalarm.com, written by Dan Malin. Always has a ton of great analysis, but these are my breakdowns for tonight. And there's not a lot of mid-priced options as there typically is with these showdown slates. So you're going to have to be very selective in which studs you include in your lineup to make sure you can fit them all under the salary cap. Starting off with the heavy hitters, I'm looking at Trevor Lawrence. He's the most expensive player on the slate, but with the way that he has been playing lately, the return that you're getting on him is just crazy good. He's had over 6 touchdowns in the past 2 weeks. He's gaining yardage. His offensive line is pretty healthy. I think that ETN should be in there as well to help balance that offensive out. And Cincinnati is allowing 249.6 passing yards per game. In the past 2 weeks, Lawrence has thrown for 262 and 364 yards. And with Zay Jones back, it really does open up that offense. So again, I know that he's expensive, so you will have to pick and choose where you find your values, but his return potential is amazing. Second on the list, we've got Travis Etienne. And I know this matchup is good, but I am a little concerned about that chest injury. That's been 2 weeks in a row that he's left with an injury and hasn't been really at 100%. He also has not been that great overall over the past few weeks. He had a great stretch during the middle of the season, but he hasn't scored over 12.6 fantasy points since week 8. So I'm a little worried about his potential to return value on his salary. So just keep that in mind if you are looking at ETN. Next up, I have Jamar Chase, and much like ETN, I'm really worried about Chase's potential to return value with his salary. His stats were a little padded last week because he caught a couple of passes that were just deflected and bobbled, and he managed to come down with them, but those were not going to him. And had he not gotten those, I think we'd be talking about him a lot differently. I also don't really think that he is quarterback proof because he's only scored 12.1 and 9.2 fantasy points over the last 2 weeks. And I don't think that that return is there with Browning. That said, if you are looking for someone to be potentially low owned and you're not scared to take the risk, he could be a good contrarian play to plug there in your lineup. We've also got Calvin Ridley, and you know how I love Calvin Ridley. If you've been following this show throughout the course of the season, if you saw our content going into the season, I was one of the Calvin Ridley truthers. And he has had back-to-back good weeks, but I will harp yet again on the difference in his performances versus man coverage versus zone coverage. He's averaging 2.4 fantasy points per target when he faces zone coverage, but only 1.24 per target when he faces man. Unfortunately for him, tonight, the Bengals play man at a top 3 rate in the league. So this could be more of a Christian Kirk game than it is Calvin Ridley. Obviously, Zay Jones being back helps him because it opens up the field more, but I still think that this is a matchup-based flop this week. I did mention Christian Kirk, and this is a guy that's really, really intriguing to me. And this is where I think that we're cooking. because I mentioned that Ridley typically has challenges against man, right? Well, it's the exact opposite for Christian Kirk. He's averaging 1.43 fantasy points per target versus zone, but 2.25 versus man, which is eighth best among all wide receivers. So he's dominated there in that type of coverage. He's also had 24 targets over the last 3 games. So tonight is prime for Kirk to have a very, very good night. We also have a couple of mid-tier options or dart throws to help balance out that salary and fit everybody that you want into that slate. And the first guy is going to be Evan Ingram. He's been fine in the receiving game. He just hasn't caught a touchdown. So his stats so far this season haven't popped on paper. You are gambling with his upside if you're using the he's due narrative, which we all love to poke fun of, but maybe he is due because this is a good matchup. The Bengals have given up the fifth most fantasy points to the tight end position and ranked 30th in DVOA. So even if he doesn't score, he still is seeing targets and he's gaining yardage. So he should still be able to put up solid numbers, even if he once again can't find the end zone. Um, to wrap this up here, I'm looking at the Jaguars defense. And I think what you're counting on here with them is just counting on the turnovers to make this a worthwhile play. They have 20 takeaways on the season, and Jake Browning, realistically hasn't played safe with the ball. I think that you can also bank on some sacks to pad the defensive stats for the Jaguars. The Bengals have given up 7 sacks over the past 2 weeks. So even if Browning doesn't commit a turnover, you're getting point after point with all those sacks he gives up. So those are my favorite plays. But again, make sure to go to fantasyalarm.com. Check out that playbook written by Dan Malin. And again, that's included as part of the All Pro package. So make sure you use that promo code Let's Go for 50% off your first monthly payment. And you get access to the playbook and all the other awesome stuff that we have to offer. So let's jump into some Monday Night Football bold predictions because, as y'all know, this is one of my favorite segments because I love getting bold. I love throwing some things out there that may not fit the narrative, but could still very well happen. If you've got some for tonight, make sure to throw them in the chat. Always love hearing yours as well. And that's what makes it such a fun family and community. So I'm going to start out here with Joe Mixon for the Bengals. And I think that he doesn't crack 50 rushing yards. The Jaguars have been very, very good against the run, only allowing an average of 84 or 87.4 rushing yards per game. And Mixon has honestly been disappointing this season. He's not been able to get it done against teams with a weaker run defense. So I think that he's going to struggle tonight. Last week, he only had 16 yards on the ground, and I think that the Jaguars do a very good job of keeping him contained. Next up, I think that Trevor Lawrence throws 2 interceptions. Now, I know I talked about him in my, heavy hitter, but interceptions don't really matter that much when it comes to fantasy. I think that Lawrence does get pressured a little bit more than he has been over the past couple weeks, and he does have 7 interceptions on the season. The Bengals have also surprisingly been one of the top teams in the league when it comes to getting interceptions. They rank 3rd with an average of 1.1 per game. And I think their defense is going to have to come through if they hope to keep this match even a little bit close. So look for Trevor Lawrence just to make a couple of mistakes and hit those 2 interceptions. Next up, Christian Kirk. Again, love, love, love that zone coverage. I think that he finishes with 8 receptions, over 100 yards, and a touchdown.
I love it!
Yes, that's what I love to hear. So we did talk about this earlier, but I cannot understate how much Kirk thrives against the man coverage, and this really is his chance. I know that this matchup is really, really good for ETN and Evan Ingram, but I still do expect Kirk to have a good night. It's not going to be a walk in the park against Mike Hilton, but I still think that he does very, very well. But finally, I think that T. Higgins outscores Jamar Chase. And this one may not be super bold, as it has happened a few times already this season, but Higgins does have a tougher matchup, which is why it lands on my bold predictions. He also is just coming back from injury, and it can sometimes take you some time to get going. But still, I think that Chase is going to get locked up in double coverage, which is going to in turn open up Higgins in a negative game script situation. Let's look for Browning to throw the ball to Higgins all night long. And Coming in with a question relevant to that, Bush League asks, is Chase a relevant rest of season? And I don't want to say that he is irrelevant because he's still the wide receiver one on a team, which you can never really overlook, especially when you're playing, twos and threes from other teams. But his ceiling is definitely very diminished. I do not trust him in the same way that I did. I think he's a flex option at best, but you still have to play one of your best players. And I'm going to caveat that by saying this is not a start your stud TED talk, but Chase is one of the guys who you have to start every week. So if you have any more questions, make sure to throw them in the chat because this show has just flown by. Time flies when you're having fun, right? And I really appreciate all of you guys joining us in here. But before we go, I want to talk about some sleeper picks because if you have been around and a fan of the show, then you know that we are sponsored by our friends over at Sleeper. And I'm sure that you house a lot of your leagues on the platform, but there is an entirely new way to enjoy Sleeper with their Sleeper Picks feature. So to play that, you just choose 2 or more players, you multiply your entry up to 100 times, and you can choose from NFL, NBA, college sports, all across the board, and more. So if your fantasy season is in the toilet, there are also single week drafts that you can enter to keep your season going. To become a part of Sleeper Picks, scan that QR code or go to fantasyalarm.com/sleeper on your mobile device. Use promo code VAULT3 for a 100% deposit match up to $100 for new users. So as every week, I've got my article for my favorite sleeper picks over on fantasyalarm.com, but let's go through a couple of my favorites and even throw in a couple little bonus nuggets for y'all. First up, have I harped on Christian Kirk enough today? Because my first one is Christian Kirk more than 3.5 receptions. Now, he's finished with this more than this stat in 8 out of 11 games that he's played this season. And again, not to harp on it, but that man versus zone coverage is so money. He's got a 22.8% target share on the year. And with that target share and catch rate, I do have him for 5.5 receptions for tonight. So I really like him to go more than that. Next up, I've got Trevor Lawrence, more than 242.5 passing yards. Look, the Bengals cannot contain the quarterback. They're allowing the most passing yards per attempt in the league and 7th most passing yards per game. Lawrence has also hit this mark in 3 of his last 4 games, and I think they come in and make a statement to show that they belong at the very tip top of the AFC with their performance tonight. I love it. Let's go, Trevor, and not just because I have you in a bunch of leagues. Next up, I'm looking at the opposite side and looking at Jake Browning, more than 0.5 interceptions. Now, he threw one last week, and although we haven't seen a lot out of him so far this season, it is just kind of to be expected that backups throw interceptions. That's just what they do, right? The Jaguars have also been good at creating these takeaways. They're averaging at exactly 1 interception per game. And if some of those throws are deflected or bobbled like they were last week, I really like the chances of the Jaguars defense getting a pick. So we're going more than 0.5 interceptions for Jake Browning. In case you can't sense the theme here, we usually go more. And I'm going to continue it here. Next up, I've got Jamar Chase, more than 55.5 receiving yards. And this is volume, people. This is a game script thing for me. I think that the Bengals are going to be down so much. It's going to be a very pass-heavy approach. Tyson Campbell, the cornerback for the Jaguars, is also questionable to suit up. So Chase may not even see the toughest matchup in that Jag secondary. And I really like him to hit this mark. So again, we're going Jamar Chase, more than 55.5 receiving yards. All right, I'm going to throw you for a loop here on this final one. Remember when we said Evan Ingram hadn't scored a touchdown so far this entire season? Yeah, that's where I'm going with it tonight. Evan Ingram, less than 0.5 touchdowns. Now, it's almost like Evan Ingram is this year's Deontay Johnson. He's getting the targets. His numbers look decent, but he just cannot find the end zone. And since I make fun of the he's due narrative so much, I'm not going to buy into that tonight, even in what should be a positive matchup. He also only has 4 targets inside the red zone all season, And even though I don't always like to take the touchdown stats, this one seems as much of a sure thing as they come until he shows me otherwise. So Evan Ingram, less than a half a touchdown. I had to throw you for a loop on the very last one. So that wraps up our sleeper picks of the day. Again, to sign up, go to fantasyalarm.com/sleeper on your mobile device or scan that QR code. Use promo code VAULT3 for a 100% deposit match up to $100 for your first time deposit. So that about wraps it up for the show today. I do want to answer this question real quick, though. Over under thoughts on tonight. I think that I'm going to lean towards the under. I just do not have a lot of faith in this Bengals offense to put up a lot of points. Um, I think that the Jaguars get this done early and then can ride out the rest of the game. And they're not going to have to play in that back and forth situation. Again, if Browning does make one of those errant throws, it's just going to lose them possessions. I'm just not confident in this Bengals offense. And yes, I do think that the Jags will cover pretty easily for tonight. If you have SiriusXM, make sure to tune in to the Fantasy Alarm Show from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern. I will be co-hosting with Howard Bender, and we'll get into that a little bit more tonight.
Ooh, he's cute. Who's he?
Yeah, you get to see me and hear me twice in one day. That's a real treat for y'all. Or, maybe a punishment on Monday. I don't know. But that about wraps up our show. Thank you guys so much for joining us. As always, really appreciate you being here. If you haven't downloaded the Bettercast app, just make sure to go over there and do that. We're all in. We're all having a great time. You get to answer prop questions throughout the game. If you win, you get tickets that you can redeem for legit and official merchandise. So what's better than merchandise is getting it for free. Download that or scan that QR code on your screen right now, or go to the Apple app and Google Play stores, and I'll see you in the Bettercast tonight. Again, if you haven't gotten the All Pro subscription to Fantasy Alarm, I really don't know what you're waiting for, because we've got all of our matchups, all of our tools, all of our sports, our Discord channel. Access to everything that you need is all in one place with that All Pro subscription. So download or scan the QR code, or go to fantasyalarm.com/win. Use promo code Let's Go for 50% off your first monthly payment. So my matchup article preview will be out on Thursday of this week, as well as our sleeper picks article coming out every day. So stay tuned over there at Fantasy Alarm for everything going on this week. Coming up next on this channel from 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern, we have the Better Sports Betting Show with Dan Servadidio and Howard Bender. And from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern, the NBA DFS Live Show with John Impemba and James Grande. So that's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope to see you guys again on Friday. Same channel, same time. Until then, we hope to see you then. Have a great week. Win all your matchups. And as always, thank you, Brian Burns, and thanks for getting blitzed.